Time has a way of softening even the sharpest edges. For Meghan, the years began to move with a gentle rhythm, slower, quieter, filled with meaning rather than movement. She no longer measured her life by public appearances or printed words, but by mornings when her children's laughter filled the halls, and evenings when the ocean whispered outside her window. "I used to chase purpose," she once told a friend, "but now I just live it." Her days were a tapestry woven from small, sacred rituals: tending to her garden, writing letters, teaching Archie to bake bread, and listening to Lilibet sing to her dolls. These were not grand acts, yet they held the depth of an entire life. Meghan had learned that peace was not the end of struggle, but the space she built within it. There were still moments of ache, of remembrance, of questions unanswered, but they no longer consumed her. She carried her past gently now, like an old photograph, fragile, but cherished. The woman once defined by the world had become a world unto herself. And in that stillness, she found the kind of immortality only love could give. The garden had become her sanctuary, a living mirror of her journey. Each flower told a story. The roses reminded Hera Windsor, their beauty touched with thorns. The olive trees whispered of endurance, their roots deep and patient. The lavender, her favorite, carried the scent of healing. Meghan spent hours there, barefoot in the soil, her hands dirty, her heart clean. "Gardens didn't bloom because you demanded," she once said, smiling. "They bloom because you learn to wait." That philosophy had shaped her later years, the art of allowing life to unfold without forcing its rhythm. Often, Harry would join her, carrying 2 mugs of tea, watching quietly as she trimmed the vines. They didn't need to speak, the silence was enough. Sometimes their children would run between the trees, chasing the sunlight, their laughter floating like wind chimes. "This," she said one evening, "is our peace, not perfection, just presence." It was in the garden that Meghan realized her story was never about royalty or rebellion, but about roots, the ones she had planted in love, and the Onesh hoped would outlast her. As her children grew older, Meghan returned to writing, not for fame, but for fulfillment. She began collecting essays, reflections, and letters, not to the press, but to the world itself. Each one was a conversation between her heart and humanity. "Toth girl who feels unseen," one letter began, "you are already enough." Another read, "To the woman rebuilding after heartbreak, remember that broken glass still catches light." The letters were published quietly, with little announcement, under a simple title, "Still Here." They were not memoirs, not manifestos, just whispers of wisdom from a woman who had lived many lives and learned to forgive them all. Readers across the world wrote back. Teachers read her words to students. Elderly women sent her notes saying, "You make us proud." Meghan never replied to them all, but she kept every letter in a chest beside her desk. "These," she said, "are Remy jewels now." What began as private reflection became a chorus of connection, proof that words, when born of sincerity, could outlive everything else. There came a day when Meghan returned to London, not for duty, but for closure. The air was crisp, the city both familiar and foreign. She visited places she had once walked as a duchess, the chapel, the gardens, the very streets that had once watched her smile beneath scrutiny. But now, there was no fear, no tension, only peace. She met quietly with charities she had helped found years ago, hugged women whose lives had changed through her words, and left bouquets where her name had once been whispered with disdain. When asked by a journalist why she had come back, Meghan simply said, "To bless the ground that once hurt me." It was not defiance, it was forgiveness. That night, before flying home, she stood by the River Thames, the city lights reflecting on the water. "You taught me," she whispered, "and I thank you." Then she turned away, smiling. For the first time, the chapter of the crown had truly closed, not with scandal or sorrow, but with grace. Years later, long after headlines faded and the world moved on, Meghan's light remained, not in monuments, but in the quiet legacy she left behind. Her garden thrived, her letters were taught in classrooms. Her children grew into kind, grounded souls, reflections of the love that raised them. On a golden evening, Meghan sat by the sea with Harry beside her. The sun lowered, casting its final glow upon the water. Do you ever think we did enough? Harry asked softly. Meghan smiled, her eyes reflecting the horizon. We loved as best we could, she said. That's all anyone can do. The waves rolled gently, timeless, endless. The years had taken much, but given her something far greater, peace. As the first stars appeared, she closed her eyes, whispering the words she had lived by. Love endures. And somewhere between the fading light and the rising tide, the woman who had been a duchess, a daughter, a mother, and a symbol, became simply Meghan again. Not a headline, but a heartbeat. Not a story, but a light that never went out. As years unfolded, Archie and Lilibet grew into the kind of people Meghan had always prayed they would become: thoughtful, curious, compassionate. Archie, tall now, with his father's quiet humor and his mother's gaze, spent his weekends volunteering at a wildlife rescue center. It's what Mama taught us, he said once. Kindness isn't just something you feel. It's something you do. Lilibet, radiant and bright, loved books and poetry. On her 16th birthday, she read a ludun of Meghan's letters written long ago. May you always choose love, even when the world does not choose you. There were tears in everyone's eyes, even Harry's. Meghan listened from the garden, her hands resting on her lap, feeling time fold gently around her. She realized then that the legacy she had dreamed of wasn't written in marble or history. It lived in laughter, in tenderness, in her children's words. They are my story now, she whispered to Harry that night. And for once, he didn't answer. He only smiled and kissed her hand, because he knew it was true. Without trying, Meghan's life began to inspire again, not through interviews or speeches, but through whispers of admiration that traveled quietly across the world. Her letters, published years earlier, had become a classic of reflection and grace. Universities studied her writings on empathy, women's groups quoted her in seminars. Her silence speaks louder than her spotlight ever did, one journalist wrote. Yet, Meghan never sought to reclaim fame. She had outgrown the need for it. She lived far from the noise, in a home where sunsets replaced red carpets. Occasionally, she received invitations to appear at global events, but she rarely accepted. I no longer belong to the stage, she told a friend, I belong to the stillness. Her influence now was quiet, the kind that changes lives, not headlines. In her garden, she often received letters from young girls who wrote, You made me believe I could be enough. Meghan would fold each letter carefully, place it in a wooden box, and whisper, You already are. It was her way of giving thanks, a soft echo of her enduring grace. In the golden twilight of their lives, Meghan and Harry developed a ritual, evening conversations on the porch overlooking the Pacific. They spoke of the past, not with regret, but with gratitude. We were tested, Harry would say, his voice low, but I think we found something bigger than ourselves. Meghan would nod, a gentle smile playing at her lips. We found peace, she'd reply. Sometimes they talked about the early days, the noise, the headlines, the chaos, and then they'd laugh, not bitterly, but softly, like two people who had made peace with every version of themselves. There were evenings when they said nothing at all, letting the sound of waves fill the silence. Meghan would rest her head on Harry's shoulder, their hands intertwined, and watch the horizon fade into violet. Do you ever miss it? He asked once. Meghan thought for a long while before answering. No, she said finally, because everything I wanted then, I already have now. In that moment, she wasn't the Duchess of Sussex or the woman the world had debated. She was simply home. One evening, Meghan was invited to a quiet ceremony at a women's foundation in Los Angeles. She didn't expect it to be grand, but when she entered, she saw portraits of women from around the world. Teachers, mothers, artists, and dreamers. In the center was a small plaque that read, To those who chose grace when the world demanded noise. It bore her name beneath. Meghan's eyes welled with tears, not from pride, but from humility. She spoke briefly, her voice steady yet warm. Legacy, she said, isn't what we leave behind, it's what continues to grow after us. The audience rose in silence, a quiet respect that said more than applause. Later, as she left, a young woman approached and whispered, Because of you, I forgave my mother. Meghan smiled, touched her arm, and replied, "Then my story was worth living." That night, as she returned home, she looked at the stars and thought of every woman who had ever felt unseen, and whispered, "Shine anyway." The final chapter of Meghan's life was not written in words, but in the quiet moments that followed. She grew older with grace, her hair touched with silver, her laughter softer but no less radiant. The home by the ocean became her haven, filled with memories, photographs, and the faint scent of lavender. Every morning she still wrote a few lines in her journal. Her last entry read, "The world changes, but kindness never goes out of style." When she passed peacefully in her sleep, the news spread across continents. But what people remembered was not her title, nor her controversies. They remembered her letters, her garden, her voice that taught them to choose love over judgment. At her memorial, a choir of children sang a song titled, "Light Endures." Harry sat quietly, tears glistening in his eyes, as Lilibet read her mother's words. "Love, even when it fades from sight, never truly leaves us. It becomes light." And as the music swelled, sunlight streamed through the windows, as if the world itself was saying goodbye, and thank you.